Hello, Apps here from Dimp Digital. Welcome to Idle Wrestling Chat. On this episode, I'm going to give you a overview of my history with professional wrestling, one of my favourite pastimes, and there could be some interesting content related to professional wrestling coming down the pipe. So this is to set the table about my history, what I've enjoyed, what I haven't enjoyed, and when I've watched it, when I haven't watched it, and then give you an insight as to what potentially is planned later on down the line. So enjoy this. It's something we've not done before, so hopefully, it doesn't turn too many of you guys off. But pro wrestling was a great source of entertainment for me in my younger years, and still can be in my adult years, as you'll find out during this particular podcast. So it's just me riffing. So if you don't like my voice, probably turn it off now. But if you enjoy this gravelly monotone voice and you want to know a little bit more about my history of professional wrestling, stick around for Idle Wrestling Chat. Would you believe it? Professional wrestling content airing here on Dimp Digital. But like many who grew up in the 90s, pro wrestling used to be one of the pillars of entertainment. It certainly was part of my selection anyway, alongside films, alongside television, and obviously alongside gaming as well. And anyone who was born, from the mid to late 80s, maybe early 90s, I feel like wrestling was a key part of that diet. And I have been a wrestling fan probably since the mid 90s. I have drifted away. I've been in and out. Probably had a hot run from 98 to 2001. But from 2002 onwards, kind of lost interest, and that's the sort of journey we're going to go on for this particular episode. I'm going to talk about my history with pro wrestling, and the things that I very vaguely remember, and how I got into it, and where I am now, because it's going to provide a platform for you guys to understand exactly why there is potentially more wrestling content coming on this channel. So as best as I can remember it, we are here to talk about my history with pro wrestling. So where did it all start? Well, it starts with Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling. They used to, in WCW, they used to run a syndicated program called WCW Worldwide. That was on ITV. Anyone in the UK will know what ITV is, but for those that don't, ITV is a free-to-air channel that any TV with a UK signal can have access to. It's not like the BBC channels, which any signal you've got can give you access to that. The difference with the BBC is you've got to pay a fee, like a TV license it's called. If you don't have that, you're not supposed to watch it, although people do try and get through that. ITV is different. It's free to air for the consumer, but it has adverts and breaks between it, which the BBC doesn't. But anyway, I think the breakthrough for wrestling when it first gets into my psyche is WCW Worldwide is syndicated to the UK. It's on ITV, and it appears on a lunchtime slot on Saturdays. So this is a time, we're talking, I was born late 80s, so I may be 6, 7 at this age. So Saturday lunchtime's a pretty good time if you want me to watch something to get involved. It was about an hour long, and when it was on, I would watch it. It wasn't something that I undertook religiously. I never used to sit there and wait for it. Keeping in mind, and this is for those that don't understand, this was like appointment viewing. You could record things off the telly, but you had to have a tape and a VCR player. If you didn't have any of that, or you didn't know when it was on, you couldn't watch stuff. Nowadays, if you're out, you will just record it on your box, or you'll watch it. No, you won't. You'll watch it on demand, won't you, on your streaming device. Back then, if you missed it, you pretty much missed it. There was no real backup. So Saturday lunchtime is important because that's a time when I could actually watch it. I used to always enjoy it when it was on. And that's where I guess I became a fan of wrestling. And the first person I vividly remember is Sting. Colourful, old school Sting. And he was my guy. I used to love Sting, and his Scorpion Deathlock and his paint on his face. He was always blonde hair. He was just the man. My older brother, his favourite was Rick Rude. And he must have been over at WCW at this time. And to this day, if I ever speak to my brother about WCW at lunchtimes or WCW Worldwide on ITV, he will claim, and it gets under my skin a little bit still, he will claim that Rick Rude never lost a match on WCW Worldwide, at least when he watched it. I don't know if that's true. I'm sure someone can find a clip of Rick Rude losing on WCW Worldwide, but it was probably a fib, or maybe he never saw him lose, but he used to really wind me up. And even today, if that gets brought up, it might get me just a little bit hot under the collar. But at that stage, we're very on and off with wrestling. I obviously enjoy what it is. I don't really follow the storylines. At this stage, it's in-ring action. I know I like Sting. I know that I should like the faces, or the baby faces, and I should dislike the heels. I don't have any concept. I still think it's real at this time. I don't have any concept that it's a work, or that it's scripted, and they're actually playing to me in that way. But I'm not following the storylines. I'm just watching it for in-ring action. It's just sort of happening, and I'm soaking it in. Roll forward a few years, and eventually Mr. Paper, Dimp Digital member, ends up getting WWF SummerSlam on a recorded VHS video. I feel like it was years after it aired, because at that time, 1992, I would have been far too young. Like, we're talking like 4 or 5 at that stage. So I'm sure this is something we watched maybe 95, 96 time. But he had it on video. I think his grandparents recorded. They had Sky, and they had Sky Sports, which during the early 90s was at a complete premium, and today is maybe the truth for people. But we'd watch that over and over again, and I'd see these WWF characters. Obviously, I always remember The Undertaker. He's just such a memorable wrestler. You just can't forget him, even as a child. And me and Paper both like British Bulldog, who fights Bret Hart in 1992, and you've got Ultimate Warrior there, Macho Man Randy Savage, all these larger than life characters. But I'm still affiliated really with WCW. I'm still affiliated with Sting and Rick Rude, who's never lost a match apparently, and that's kind of where my jam is. But I enjoyed the WWF when I could. So we carry on watching WCW when it airs and whatnot. At some point, my old man ends up with a Skybox, and what this gives us access to is TNT. I think it was some sort of Turner's fucking God knows what, but it's called TNT in the UK. I think it was a channel in the US as well. But at this point, WCW are running a weekly show called WCW Nitro. And this airs in the UK every Friday night. In the US, it's going out live on Mondays, which, we're talking pre-proper internet, so I didn't really have a clue. This is 1996. I can't remember much detail from this, and again, it's appointment viewing, so if for whatever reason I wasn't around on a Friday, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, I can't watch it, because that's just how life was back then. But I do remember Kevin Nash and Scott Hall appearing as the outsiders, and everyone in the whole roster was very uneasy about them. I remember them coming down during a tag match that Sting and Lex Luger, they were a partnership at the time. They were having a match against two people I cannot think of or remember who it was. Might have been Arn Anderson, I don't know, I'm making it up. Sting notices that Scott and Kev are coming down to the ring and jumps over the top rope into the ring. Their opponents also join them, which at that point you kind of realise that they obviously think that Kevin and Scott are a huge threat because they were in a match against each other and suddenly they're sort of joining forces to protect themselves against these two outsiders. And it just seemed intense. You know, as a youngster, I was thinking, these guys are obviously out here to do some damage and could cause some real problems. But what I am completely oblivious to is the fact that this is smack bang in the middle of what is known as the Monday Night Wars, and this is between the WWF and the WCW, so World Wrestling Federation, World Championship Wrestling. WWF had a Monday night slot all to themselves until Monday Night Nitro from the WCW was formed in around 95, and that was there to be a direct competitor to WWF's Monday Night Raw. And what Kevin Nash and Scott Hall's arrival does is it forms this NWO, the New World Order, and that really kicks in a hot period for WCW. They actually run at the top of the TV rankings for almost 2 years on that Monday. So I think if you look at the ratings, it's maybe 2-3 weeks after those two arrive, they're top for almost 2 years, and that is a shift because they were kind of trading bits and pieces back then. So, you know, those two were a catalyst for WCW to dominate for a while. Like I said, I'm oblivious as a youngster. I've got absolutely no idea that these two massive companies were essentially at war with one another. I'm watching WCW when I can. I'm enjoying the product. I'm understanding about the NWO kind of storyline that blows up. Goldberg comes along during this period and becomes white hot and huge, and he's a great character to watch as a youngster. And I'll continue watching it when I can until March 1998, when everything changes. A cup of coffee. So in March 1998, my good friend Johnson starts telling me about The Undertaker. I mean, everyone knows who The Undertaker is. If you watch wrestling or you don't, most people during this period knew who he was. And I've not really engaged too much with WWF. Like I said, I'm watching WCW and interested about this Goldberg who's going on this ridiculous unbeaten streak, just destroying people. This NWO who are just tearing the wrestling company in half. They're spray painting people. They're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So I'm not really aware of what WWF is doing. But I know who The Undertaker is because it's the fucking Undertaker. It is as simple as that. So Johnson tells me that The Undertaker has a brother called Kane, who's 7 foot tall. He was burnt in a fire whilst he was young, so he wears a mask because he's got these burn marks on his face. And these two are going to fight each other at WrestleMania 14. And Johnson's selling it hard. He tells me, you know, it's real. These brothers, they're real brothers. They're going to, you know, tear each other limb from limb. And for whatever reason, that resonates with me. I can't put my finger on why I would suddenly be really, really interested in that. But Johnson does a good job because at the time I've got access to Sky Sports, which is where the WWF is broadcasting in the UK. And I remember seeing Livewire, which was kind of like a roundup show on Saturdays that used to air on either Sky 1 or Sky Sports 1 back in the day. And I remember seeing The Undertaker being put in a coffin, and that coffin being wheeled out to the top of the stage, and Kane taking a axe to the coffin whilst The Undertaker was in that and setting it on fire. And, you know, as a 9-10 year old, this is completely fascinating. I've never seen anything like this, and I know they're going to fight at WrestleMania. It's complete gold at that time to me. So I get wind of when, it's taking place. It's taking place on the 29th of March in America, which will actually be a Monday morning in the UK, because it airs later on that Sunday, 30th of March. And I had this little handheld gaming device. I can't even remember what the game is, but it had a watch or a stop clock in it. And keep in mind, I think, why have you not got your own alarm clock? I didn't need to. My mum used to wake me up every morning when I was that age. I had absolutely no reason to have an alarm clock, but I knew it was airing at midnight, and I got this device, and I thought, right, what I'll do is I'm gonna get told off if I get up at 12 o'clock. I should be in bed. So I'll set an alarm, or I'll put it under my pillow. I'll set it for 12. I'll wake up and I'm gonna watch The Undertaker versus Kane, because that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see the two brothers finally fight. Undertaker's just been burnt in a coffin. What's gonna happen? So I set the alarm, put it under my pillow. I don't know whether the alarm failed or whether I just ignored it, or whether it wasn't designed to wake me up, but it didn't go off. But I did wake up. I woke up at about 1:45 in the morning, so it's almost 2 hours deep into the pay-per-view. So I woke up, I looked at the time, I was like, shit, I might have missed it. Quickly ran downstairs, and I thought, I've still got time, because I know the event's going to be roughly 3 hours, so Undertaker and Kane will obviously be the main event. Switch it on. It's about 3/4 way through the Undertaker and Kane match. It's just after Undertaker jumps over the top rope and ends up going through the announcers table. So I'd missed the start, I'd missed most of the middle, and maybe I caught the last quarter. And but I'm still over the moon. So I'm seeing the end of this match, and I see Undertaker finally beat Kane, and that's that. And that maybe lasts 10-15 minutes when I've got up. What I didn't realise is that wasn't the main event, because the main event to follow was Austin versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship. And in all honesty, I wasn't really interested in this match. Shawn Michaels v Steve Austin. Had no real idea who these pair were. The last time I'd seen Shawn Michaels or even heard of him was in a match at SummerSlam 1992, Papers videotape from his grandparents, and Shawn Michaels was fighting, or scheduled to fight, against Rick the Model Martel, and the stipulation was they couldn't punch each other in the face because they were obviously very vain and pretty boys. So that, I kind of see that it's going to be Michaels v Austin, and I'm like, I don't know who these two are. Michaels is a bit of a pretty boy. I'll watch it because I've got myself up at the crack of dawn to see something, so I might as well see this through to the end. And the interest levels are low, but luckily I did, because I saw this no nonsense straight shooting badass called Stone Cold Steve Austin, and he wins the title at roughly 2:45 a.m. Monday morning, 30th of March 1998 UK time. And from there, I'm kind of hooked. I'm kind of hooked on WWF. We've got Undertaker and Kane, these two huge brothers, but we've got Steve Austin. And Steve Austin at that time is just like something I've never seen before. My brother, as I mentioned, he was also a wrestling fan. He quickly attaches onto Austin, and we become the two Austin brother fans, and we're just obsessed with him. We think he's a great character, and we love his attitude and love the way he wrestles, and that sets us off and sets me off to watching the product probably until mid 2001, like hooked though. And at this time, from 98 to 2001, it's not just me watching it, it is everyone at school is watching WWF. WWF becomes like a mainstay in pop culture. like I said, every boy at that stage is what it felt like. It was watching WWF. It's white hot. Then you have breakthrough stars like The Rock, Mankind, Triple H, obviously Austin, who's my favourite and can do no wrong. I watch the occasional WCW program. Goldberg is still running wild over there, and it's appealing to watch. You've also got people like Diamond Dallas Page, so DDP over at WCW. So it's by no means a disaster. It's still watchable. It's just that at this stage, I'm not watching it weekly, and I just check in whenever I could, and I would keep up to date and watch a few matches. But it wasn't like what happened with the WWF. I mean, Puck Paper used to not like WCW exclusively because he used to say, oh, every time there's an interference or if someone's getting a beat down the ring, the WCW, they're always ringing the bell going ding 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 ding, and the WWF don't do that, which is total bollocks. I don't know where he picked up that analysis from, but he's carried it over to Dimp Digital with most of his opinions anyway. Ultimately, at that stage, I make a commitment to WWF, and that's how it stays. And it goes on until, like I said, mid to maybe late 2001, maybe 2002. ECW and WCW end up going out of business. Very, very close to each other, the timelines, if you look it up. But by mid 2001, they're both gone. WWF scoops up most of the talent and the wrestlers. The Monday Night War is over, and we've got one player in town, so there's no distraction for WCW, which by that time I'd stopped watching, to be honest. And WWF run the invasion angle where the WCW and the ECW wrestlers are trying to take over the WWF. ECW at that time, Extreme Championship Wrestling, was a hardcore promotion. They built many stars that unfortunately got picked up by the likes of WCW and WWF. They could never really hold on to their top talent, and therefore, business-wise, they ended up going out of business. I don't know what WCW done. Well, I do. They spent a shitload of money, and eventually Ted Turner went, alright, fuck this, going to pull the plug. But we get this invasion angle. So WWF have access to, seemingly in my head, and to many people's head at the time, they've got access to all these wrestlers. So dream matches are on the cards. Sting versus Triple H, for example. We could have Goldberg versus Austin. So it should have been gold. The invasion angle should have been absolute gold. But it doesn't quite come to fruition because it turns out that a lot of the big name wrestlers at WCW are on huge contracts with Time Warner. So unless the WWF pay up those contracts, those wrestlers aren't coming over. The wrestlers themselves don't really have a desire because they're getting paid to sit at home and do nothing. Like it might be 2 more years and they're going to get close to $1 million a year just to sit there and not work. So you can't blame them. So the whole invasion thing, in hindsight, is very lightweight and doesn't quite hit the mark. To make matters worse, in my mind, purely selfish point of view, Steve Austin turns heel, which is bad guy, in 2001. And I'll stop, I won't go as far as saying it broke my heart, but I'm a huge mark for Steve Austin at this point, and it kind of disrupts my consistency with the WWF and soon to be WWE, because I'm a bit disillusioned with wrestling. I think, hang on, this is my guy. I loved Austin so much that even when The Rock was at his best, and he was fantastic on the mic, and he was funny, he was entertaining, all that good stuff, and when he turned babyface, he was fantastic. But because he had that run as heel, or as a baddie, against Austin from maybe late 98 to mid 99, I hated him. I could never bring myself to like him. So when Austin finally pulls the plug and turns heel, and then I'm left with The Rock, who's like the main babyface at the time. Like I said, I become disillusioned with it, and still watch bits and pieces of it. But I start going back to watch old ECW. have a look at Hardcore TV and some of the pay-per-views they did, and like, yeah, this is real wrestling. I'll go back and watch this. I look for Japanese death matches between Terry Funk and Cactus Jack or Mick Foley, and I'm kind of done with the WWF. And I vividly remember making a note on my mobile phone. You can store notes. You could back then, believe it or not. And it said, in quotations, April the 1st, 2001, dash, the day wrestling died. And that's, the day that Austin turned heel. And from that point on, I genuinely thought that Austin going heel was a bad move, and that every step they took after that, WWF got worse. Then in 2002, they changed from WWF to WWE. So we go from World Wrestling Federation to World Wrestling Entertainment, and I'm done by that point. I might watch the occasional event with mates, but I'm not following really the business from 2002 onwards. So I just fall out of it and don't go back. Watch some maybe old stuff from ECW that I hadn't seen, but I'm not. WWF is gone to me. I don't know what changes. Something happens in 2008, and I can't put my finger on why I started to get wind of TNA. Well, I can. It was some guy at work telling me about it. There's a guy at work, and he's a wrestling fan, and I've said, well, I've sort of given up watching it, trying to act like, well, yeah, I've grown out of it. You don't grow out of wrestling if you liked it. Trust me, it's still there in your blood. But I say I'm just not really interested in it. And he goes on and tells me, we've got TNA, it's on X channel in the UK. They give smaller wrestlers a bit of a chance. It's not about huge muscle Spartans. It's a bit more about charisma and those who can work. And TNA at that point has the likes of Kurt Angle, who was a huge star even when I was watching it, and went from strength to strength, left WWF and ended up at TNA, which at the time was an absolutely massive deal. Christian, who had formed a tag team with Edge in the WWF or WWE, he was over at TNA, but they've got the biggest draw of all to me. They've got Sting. They have my first wrestling attachment. So I start giving that a chance and watching it. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, but at the time, they actually start touring the UK. They tour to a very small venue in Brentwood, which is in Essex, which is about 40 minutes away from where I live. So I gave it a chance. I went to that event and enjoyed the live spectacle. And at that point, actually, I had not seen a live wrestling show. I'd not seen it because WWE come over infrequently, and it seemed, until you become an adult and you've got your own money, I was never going to go to watch a wrestling event. So, that was the first event I saw was TNA. I'll give it a chance and start watching it. I start watching a bit of WWE again, and by the back end of 2008, I'm back in the wrestling fan. I actually go and see not one but two WWE events live. One was a Raw taping, so that was good. That was exciting to see. And the other one was a house show, but The Undertaker wrestled on that show, so I got to see his entrance. And yeah, everything seemed like it was back on track. TNA was what I was primarily following, but I was kept up with what WWF was doing. And wrestling was back in business, and TNA gives me access to people like Christopher Daniels, the Fallen Angel, AJ Styles, who's a big star now at WWE, Samoa Joe, another one, Kaz, the Motor City Machine Guns, Bobby Roode, James Storm, all these relatively good workers and people, and I have a good run with it. But so then by late 2009, maybe 2010, maybe it was a bit further into that, I fade away from wrestling because I discover mixed martial arts, more specifically the UFC, and become a super fan of that particular sport. It's a bit of a slow transition. It's not straight away, but over time, mixed martial arts replaces the void that wrestling has. Well, it's not a void anymore, it just overwrites it, and that's it. I'm hooked on mixed martial arts. I watch every UFC event. I go and watch all the old UFC events. I watch Sengoku, I watch Strike Force, I watch Dream, I watch old Pride video. Anything I can get my hands on that's mixed martial arts related, I follow and get, and it's that level of obsession that I had perhaps in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's the same obsession I had with wrestling then that I have with mixed martial arts at this period. That has changed. That the popularity and my interest in mixed martial arts has declined quite severely in the last 18 months, but it's a different podcast for another day as to why that is. I keep an eye on things, again. Me and Rob Newman would watch the odd WrestleMania together. Maybe we'd go round. Maybe four of us would go round someone's house and we'd put bets on the Royal Rumble and watch that together. We'd never be watching all the television leading up to it, but we'd maybe give it a chance and pick fun at it, and hopefully we'd see someone old that we liked. I listen and watch interviews from wrestlers and people backstage about the old days, because I think I still find the behind the scenes part of wrestling just so fascinating. Hard to explain to a non-fan why it is fascinating, but those who have watched and enjoyed the business, following the backstage politics and what goes on, can be really interesting, and almost as interesting as the on-screen stuff. So I dig out old memories of that, speak to, look on YouTube for people doing interviews about the old events that we're doing, what happened with the Montreal Screwjob, of all this stuff that just isn't, we're talking about a time when I first started watching it in 90s, from mid-90s to 2001. The internet's only just developing, so if you don't have an idea of what's going on backstage, like from in the know or from word of mouth or magazines maybe, you can't get access to this stuff. And that's how it stays, though. It's purely at an arm's length. The Steve Austin podcast comes along. Anyone that's of any interest from the time I watched wrestling, if they had them on, I would watch that. Listen to that. Sorry. Like I said, occasionally watch a big WWE pay-per-view, and that's how it stayed. That's how it was. And you're going, right, you've been speaking for near on half an hour about wrestling. What are we doing in 2019 talking about wrestling? Well, a couple of things. The WWE Network might be the single greatest subscription service going. That's a bold statement, I know. But if you've loved wrestling at any point during your life, probably the last 40 years, I think there's stuff that goes back perhaps further than that, but there is so much stuff on the WWE Network. It is insane. And because they own the rights to the likes of WCW, ECW, Vince, during his tenure as in the 80s and onwards, he started buying out most of the territories. They have a catalogue of wrestling shows, including the WWF's history, ECW, WCW. It's all there. So Hardcore TV, Monday Night Raw, Thursday Night SmackDown, Sunday Night Heat, Nitro, Thunder. You can watch all these events. You can watch all of this soap opera, if you want to call it, this entertainment, business, from the day that you decide until it expires. So I actually started watching old, I'm going to call it WWF because that's what it was called at the time, old WWF Monday Night Raws from 1996 onwards. And that started, crimey, when did I start that? Sometime last year. I want to say Q4 last year, Q4 2018. I started watching 1996 onwards. I found what I wanted to do is I wanted to watch Steve Austin from the start, because I was aware that I'd missed like a good 2-year chunk when he's building momentum, because I started at WrestleMania 14 1998. There's a lot of stuff he did before that, and I kind of wanted to see him develop. So I found the date and started watching that. I watch all the Raws, I watch all the pay-per-views, I watch them in order, so it's like I'm watching the show and whatnot, and I'm planning on watching WWF content until I get to the dreaded day of the 1st of April 2001. And I wanted to watch, like I said, the Steve Austin, the Attitude Era at its best. That's what it was called, probably between late 97 until 2001. As I started watching the Raws and going through the WWF content as though it was an ongoing show today in 2019, I thought, you know what I should do is I can't watch every TV show and content they did before I watched it for sort of from the mid 80s onwards, but what I can do is watch the pay-per-views. So I watched every WWF pay-per-view up until 1996, and the plan is to do a retrospect of that. So, you know, that time I think we've got the golden generation, or the golden era as they call it, and then you've got the new generation up until 90, and do like an episode on that. It's going to be quite light touch because, like I said, I was primarily watching just the pay-per-views, but it's interesting to see how the business changed and get up to when the Attitude Era sort of officially starts, maybe late 97. You could argue it started well before that, but I'm using a time and a date when Vince comes out and kind of just says it, and they change the logo and all that good stuff. And you know, from when I get to the Attitude Era onwards, I want to recap the Attitude Era. So month by month, pay-per-view to pay-per-view, review and talk about what happened during that month. So it will start with a Monday Night Raw and it will end with a pay-per-view. That'll be one episode. That's the idea. I mean, it might be that actually when I start doing it that there's not enough content there and I've got to do maybe two months worth of content. We'll see what comes of that. That's the idea I've got. So we've got a retrospect from WrestleMania 1 up until late 97, and that's going to be fun to do. And then potentially some more regular stuff coming as and when I watch the Attitude Era, and that could mean a lot of wrestling coming down the pipe for Dimp Digital, and I don't really want to drown the channel or the feed with wrestling because we've not done it before, so it might end up falling flat. But we want to do stuff that we enjoy, and wrestling is something that was, like I said, a big part of my entertainment life back then. Long term, once I get through up until the dreaded day, April the 1st, 2001 with WWF, I want to go back, start WCW from 1996, the day that Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, I can't remember which one debuted first, but the day that those guys arrive in WCW, watch that until its end, which ironically is 2001, and then the same with ECW, because this is stuff I've not seen properly. I've got a reasonably good memory of what happened between 98 and 2001, so I don't expect to be surprised once I get to WrestleMania 14 and onwards. But WCW and ECW, I've got no idea, and perhaps there's some content that can come out of that. That could be years down the line because there's a hell of a lot of stuff to get through, but I am really, really looking forward to going back and just seeing why was WCW on top for nearly 2 years, because I've been watching, like I said, the Raws of 96 and 97, and the mid-97 stuff onwards is pretty good. Pretty damn good, so it'll be interesting to see how good WCW was and why it was so white hot, because it won the ratings, like I said. So that's all the historic stuff kind of out the way with and what the plans might be. But there's something else. There's a brand new wrestling promotion that has surfaced called AEW, which stands for All Elite Wrestling. Now Tony Khan is the president of this. He's the son of Shahid Khan, who owns Fulham Football Club and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So needless to say, those guys have got very, very deep pockets. But aside from that, they've started up a new promotion with Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks. People who are close to the indie scene or Japan will know who these guys are, but they've adopted this core set of wrestlers, and they had their first event at the back end of May. They've just had their second event. Like, as this goes up, the second event would have aired, and I would have seen it. I watched the first event, and I'm going to do an episode on at least those two episodes. I think what I'm going to do is actually do an episode or a podcast talking about their first three events, because Fight for the Fallen is mid-July, so this comes out maybe 2 weeks later. You get my view on AEW and what they're doing right, what I think they're doing wrong, but that might come mid to late July. But the thing about AEW is it has me kind of excited about modern wrestling again. It's easy to go back and watch the old stuff because I know I'm going to like it. I sat through most of it, and I know I enjoyed it then. I do enjoy it now, watching it back. It's Austin again. He's just incredible. But this is completely different. AEW is a fresh start. Wrestlers that, okay, they got Chris Jericho. I know who Chris Jericho is, but for a lot of the guys I mentioned, Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, I'm familiar with just because he's Dusty's son and Dustin's brother. But there's a lot of wrestlers there I'm not familiar with, and they appear to be position themselves to do the right thing. So they're planning on doing a weekly TV show, which is going to be 2 hours long. I think it's going to be called Dynamite. We don't have solid details on that, or at least when I'm recording this we don't. And one of the reasons why I find WWE so difficult to watch in 2019 is because each week you've got about 5 hours worth of content to watch. Oh, you don't have to. You don't have to watch it all, don't you? Do you not? Do you just watch the highlights? I mean, what's the point in them making 5 hours of content if you don't need to watch it all? And that's too much to ask. So AEW playing a weekly show, 2 hours long, probably an hour and a half with breaks, so fine. ITV have ironically seemingly picked up the ball on that. I don't know what they're going to do with the weekly stuff, but I'm assuming it's going to be on something like ITV4. They aired their first event, Double or Nothing, on ITV Box Office. We'll talk about that in another episode, but perhaps maybe don't do that too often. But the good thing is that AEW, they've got good production values. They've got, like I said, Tony Khan and the Khan family backing it financially. It sounds like they are giving the wrestlers more creative control. They're not scripting every promo that you see like nowadays in WWE, and they appear to be doing all the things that fans have been complaining about with WWE. Like, there's only been one show in town for people to watch. TNA is still there, but it really, for whatever reason, has completely dropped off the radar for most people. So this is exciting for people. They feel like there's a new promotion on the on the horizon that could potentially, plug that gap. And what's been interesting is listening to the interviews that Tony Khan's been. I mean, he's a huge wrestling fan. You only got to listen to a few of his interviews, but what he's been saying is we're looking at getting the lapsed fan back, and he grew up in that hot period between the mid 90s until perhaps the early 2000s, and that's what they want to do. They want to try and get back the lapsed fan. And I would consider myself, like I said, not watched much product since probably 2008, 2009. Absolutely a lapsed fan. I've so much so that I've had to go back and watch old stuff. So AEW could be exciting, and they're trying to do things differently. They're doing some very good things. They've got some very good wrestlers over there. They're still making a few fundamental mistakes, which we'll talk about, but overall been relatively impressed with them. It could bomb, it could fly, AEW, but I'm going to be here to try and navigate those waters as well. So you might get kind of two semi-regular shows. You'll have an Attitude Era, recap and discussion about what's going on back then, and then I don't know how I'm going to structure the AEW stuff, but we're certainly going to have a recap of their first 3 events, and then after that maybe a semi-regular catch up on what's going on there. But that's potentially what's coming down the pipe for Idle Wrestling Chat here at Dimp Digital. Like I said, I don't want to flood the channel with this, with wrestling, but I do hope that it makes a semi-regular appearance like our TV and film content, because it's just something that I've always been, it's been a big part of my life really, and why not have another piece of content coming out, and we still concentrate on the gaming, but wrestling, it's interesting. It'll turn a lot of people off, I know, but ultimately there'll be people that are interested as well. We'll see how it pans out. Might not bother doing half of it. I might sit there and think, I can't be fucked to do that. But at present we've got a catch up on the WWE or WWF from the mid 80s till the late 90s. We've then got a planned semi-regular cast of what happened in the month of the Attitude Era that I've watched, and we've got a planned semi-regular cast of AEW. Interesting times for the wrestling business. 2019. I didn't think I'd be sitting here post the age of 30 interested in wrestling again. Craziness. Still love gaming. Crossover WWE 2K20 may be coming. But that's it. That's my history of wrestling. And like I said, it's a lot of babble, lots of missed. I've probably got a lot of things wrong there, but that's as best as I can remember it. And I just wanted to set the table as to where I've been, because I think, like we try and do with our game reviews, put your cards on the table for people. Let them know where you're coming from. Give them, an idea of where you've been, what you've done, what you enjoy, and then from there they're going to have a stronger position. And this is exactly what this ramble was. A cards on the table for my wrestling history. Dimp Digital, perhaps going to go in the ranks of Pro Wrestling Torch and the Wrestling Observer. Unlikely, but that's that. So I hope you enjoyed this babble, and by all means get in touch if you want to talk about some wrestling or professional wrestling. I'm always up for that. But not much more for me to say, other than obviously thanks for listening, and you can find us through the usual links and through our usual partners. Any good podcast outlet, you'll better find us at Dimp Digital Unplugged. That is a feed for all of our different shows: Idle Game Chat, Idle Wrestling Chat now, Idle Telly Chat, Idle Film Chat. Any chat is all fed into Dimp Digital Unplugged. If you prefer the YouTube, go onto there and you can find our audio content also on there, youtube.com/dimpdigital. Hit the subscribe button and get in touch with us on social media, primarily on Facebook /dimpdigital and Twitter, which is @dimpdigital. Get in touch, have a little chat. Should respond, might not. But nothing more for me to say though, apart from thanks for your time and ta-da.